If you look at energy, India is essentially dependent on imports. Almost one third of the supply of oil globally comes from the Middle East.
There is the oil cartel, right? It is dominated by players in the Middle East.
Prior to the gas value chain, how would that work in India?
Domestically produced gas, it's ONGC or Oil India which produce the gas from their field. Reliance earlier had set up a pipeline from KG Basin, Andhra Pradesh, coming right up to Gujarat. One important point which will help the gas sector, apart from the focus of the government, is
in today's episode, I'll be your host Shashank Udupa, and I also have with me Unmesh and Harshad from HDFC Securities. In today's episode, we will be diving into the gas sector, which is one of the most crucial sectors in India but often overlooked as well. In today's episode, we will talk about EVs and whether EV poses a long-term threat to the natural gas industry. Now, by the end of this episode, as a retail investor, you will have clear understanding about this growing sector. So, Harshad and Unmesh, thank you for coming on this episode. So, here I want to talk about the gas industry. Now, let me set a little bit of context. So, gas industry for a retail investor is very difficult to understand because it is very complex. But I also know that gas industry is very heavily dependent on global economics, right? With the production of oil, etc. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but I want to understand from your perspective first, from a global level or a macro level, how does natural gas fit into the entire picture? How does one track it, or what happens in that area?
okay. If you look at energy, India is essentially dependent on imports, whether it's oil, whether it's gas. For gas, it's almost 50% is imported of our consumption. In oil, it's over 80%, about 85% is imported. So essentially, yes, what you mentioned just now, we are at the mercy of global prices as well as global supply. And essentially, this is a commodity sector. So prices are decided by how the demand and supply pan out globally. India is a price taker. So in that sense, if you then look at how it is consumed, I mean, in terms of gas or oil, most of your transportation requirements are oil related, whether it's aviation fuel, whether it's petrol, diesel. So that is a larger portion of where oil goes in.
And if you look at it again from a global standpoint, we know that whenever there's a conflict or like the tensions that are happening geopolitically, we see that oil prices either shoot up, or I think in the few months ago it also fell down to its lowest point and now it again shot back up. So I know this is controlled by the oil producing nations, but can you explain a little bit on how this fluctuation happens so drastically?
If you look at the key suppliers, a big chunk, almost one third of the supply of oil globally comes from the Middle East.
Okay.
And that's where most of the geopolitical issues are. At least currently, that's the scene of. We also had, if you remember, we also had issues between Ukraine and Russia some time back. And that time too, there was an impact because Russia is a big producer of oil. So with the sanctions coming in, so most of these suppliers, now anything which happens to the transportation route or in the regions where the production happens. So suddenly you see volatility in oil prices. And where commodities is concerned, a small change in terms of impact on supply or demand has a big impact on prices. I mean, because usually the demand growth is 1%, 2% per year. So within that, of that growth, even if 10% goes away, that's a big impact on the final price.
No, though I must add that while there is the oil cartel, right, which is called OPEC. While it is dominated by players in the Middle East, and then Russia, obviously, a participant in that. Over a period of 2 decades, there has also been a shift where the amount of the contribution of OPEC to the global oil supply is actually also dropped quite a bit, even though now I think it's around 60%, right? Even now?
No, it's about 30% now, 35%, one third.
Okay,
right
so
now.
the rest because of the fact that on an aggregate level, US became self-sufficient in oil. And then as oil prices went up, a lot of oil resources which were difficult to extract earlier, for example, the Canadian sands, the oil sands, tar sands as they are called, incrementally shale and the capacity came on stream. As a result of, and as they came on stream, their cost of production fell as well. So in a sense, what's happened is that the relevance of OPEC, while still significant, is not now dominating. So like you got the oil shock in the 70s or even before the global credit crisis, that's not actually something that has happened now for a very long time. There is also a slight difference between, I think, because we want to talk about gas as well, is that the reason why oil was dominant in the energy basket was also because you could transport it. Gas actually, unless you have a pipeline,
Oil is a lot more fungible
Yeah.
in terms of regions.
you could put it on a truck.
It's denser energy.
Yeah.
So you could actually load it onto ship without any additional processing and transport it over longer distances. It's still economical.
Yeah.
Gas is not because of the volume. So gas, you needed to freeze it, reduce it, and so that you can pack more on a ship. Only once that was economical did we start having LNG imports and exports. Otherwise, gas was bound by region or till the distance till which you can take the pipeline,
Absolutely.
essentially.
And what happened was that till the time oil prices were sub 20, I remember back in the day, the gas they used to just burn it away because it comes out of the same, it comes out of the same place, right? So the gas comes first and you can't do anything with it because there's no pipeline. So you just burn it or just leave it in the environment. But as oil prices started to go up, you found that this was another thing that you could burn, so as to speak. Also, what's happened is that gas, if transported correctly and brought, is less carbon intensive than oil. So what happens is that there is a natural propensity that if you are trying to reduce your carbon emissions, that why not use.
Yes, gas is preferable. In fact, we would come to that later, but that's one of the reasons why gas sector is looking good in India in terms of the environmental issues and the government's focus on it.
Okay.
So gas is more environment friendly. So
And what about the price? Are they similar? Like, is it what do you call that? Directly related to each other or inversely related to? Like, if oil prices go up, natural gas falls down, or is it completely different?
So it's not 100% replaceable because somebody who's, for example, if you're using a car which runs on a diesel or a petrol, unless you do the essentially capex on a smaller level, at your level, individual level, convert it to so that it can use gas, you can't really burn gas. So you can't, just because oil has moved up in a short while, you can't just start from tomorrow, you can't start using. It's similar with industries. So they also need to put in equipment before they can start using gas. You can have both dual fuel. So to that extent, you can. So it's not 0 or 100 kind of situation.
Yeah, in essence, what happens is that if there's someone who's using liquid fuel, for them to convert to gaseous fuel, so as to speak, requires a completely different set of equipment. So while yes, there are a lot of people who seem to have taken a hedged bet. So invariably what has happened is that the oil and gas over a long period of time are related to each other because they can be substituted. But in short periods of time, because of the amount of investment which has gone in liquid and gaseous fuel will control how the prices move and the transportation of that.
Okay. And if you ask today, if I had to ask you from an India perspective, right? We are more oil dependent compared to natural gas, but we are moving into natural gas for the future is what I can assume,
Yeah,
correct?
that's about right.
Once the capex kicks in and all of that. Now, I want to understand the next step. Okay, we understood gas and oil. Now, how does that, okay, it comes to India. Now, what happens? What is the value chain that goes across this with the oil and gas companies?
Okay, first thing, all
One by
this
one.
started because the government is pushing it. Government wants to take the share of gas to about 20%, 15% by 2030. We are at about 6.5% right now. So that's the
That's
big
the entire
thrust.
energy basket.
Yes.
But
So
why?
that's the big thrust because one, environment friendly. Two, over the long term, gas is cheaper.
Okay.
So over the long term, again, there will be short-term volatility, but over the long term, so because we produce a lot more as a percentage of the basket of consumption of the gas, and there are more gas finds or discoveries already there. So over a period, you will have more production. So you don't need to import as much. So the impact on the currency is also comes in. So you would prefer to have gas more than oil.
So if I had to take gas value chain, how would that work in India?
Okay. So one is, so there are two main sources of gas, one that we produce in India, one that you import. So import is what is called LNG, liquefied natural gas. In terms of chemical composition, it is the same. It's just a physical way. For example, liquefied, it just they refrigerate it and liquefy it, and that's how they use to transfer. So that's why it's called LNG. So for domestically produced gas, it's ONGC or Oil India which produce the gas from their fields, drilling and getting it out. From there, they put that into the pipelines of GAIL, the long distance pipelines. So essentially, those are the pipelines which would say start from Gujarat and go right up to north, or now the GAIL is setting up a pipeline from north to east. Reliance earlier had set up a pipeline from KG Basin, Andhra Pradesh, coming right up to Gujarat. So these long distance pipelines is what will get you almost across the length and breadth of India. Then they connect to either individual pipelines or city gas networks. So city gas networks are essentially distributors going right up to retail consumers like households or for vehicles, or even to small industries.
Okay. Can you give me an example of a company in the last mile?
So in city gas networks, we have Indraprastha Gas, which essentially
Okay.
started with the Delhi region. It was set up to set up the distribution network within Delhi. You have Mahanagar Gas in Mumbai. You have Gujarat Gas in Gujarat, to a large extent of Gujarat. You have Adani Total Gas. So again, government has given out a lot of, and this being a sort of a monopolistic infrastructure, because you don't want to replicate the infrastructure. So government gives out licenses or authorizations for particular areas. So there is essentially one company for one area. So you can have multiple areas, but in one area there is only one company laying out the pipeline.
Okay.
And for the pipeline itself, there are to a large extent three different uses. One is that it goes to what you would call the petrol pump for the CNG to be filled, so for transportation. The second is the piped natural gas which comes into the house, which replaces LPG cylinders basically. And then the third is that a lot of this, so for example, Gujarat Gas would have a lot bigger
Industrial.
contribution of the industry. Now, large consumers like fertilizers, for example, there is a very large basket of, they are using that as a fuel. And the other, there are various industries like tiles, for example. These are all very energy intensive industries which have over a period of time changed their fuel mix towards gas. So once the large pipeline offloads into the small CNG, into the city gas network, these are typically the three big users of that gas.
Okay, so just summarizing it again, so we have the major oil producers like Oil India and ONGC, which are the
Yes.
biggest.
Yes.
They transport it via GAIL, which is a pipeline network, which goes to the city regional Mahanagar
That's
Gas
right.
or Indraprastha
That's
or
right.
Adani Total.
That's right.
That's how it works.
Now the other source is LNG. So either that
Which is the
comes
imported
in,
gas. Yeah.
Petronet has a terminal which converts the liquid to gas, and then again puts it into GAIL pipeline. Then the rest of the flow is similar.
Okay. Okay,
So
interesting.
instead of producing it, you import it from say US or Qatar. It comes to the port, download it to Petronet's terminal and tank, convert it from liquid to gas, put it into GAIL's network.
So I have a question on the. I'm trying to break it down into more simple formats. Let's say ONGC gave some kind of an output worth 100 rupees, right? Now, do they give it to GAIL at 100 plus 105 rupees, and then that reaches this guy at 110? How does that work? Like just the value chain.
Okay, ONGC. So the way gas prices work, or ONGC for oil, it gets globally linked prices, but gas you cannot have a similar formula, simply because there are different benchmarks in different regions. So the government has, for some part of gas which ONGC produces, and which is called APM gas, Administered Price Mechanism. It's essentially government decides the price. The government has set up a formula based on which, as for this year and part of next year, the price is fixed at $6.5 per MMBTU. So that price is fixed. ONGC gets that price. It transfers to GAIL. GAIL adds its charges for transferring through its pipeline, hands it over to a city gas network. City Gas network on top of it adds its margin, which will have marketing as well as the transmission, and which is the final price for the end consumer.
Okay.
So essentially, you pay margins and the cost of each leg
Yeah.
where pipelines are concerned.
So now we also heard about PM Modi talking about the pipeline project where every household should have gassed pipeline instead of the cylinders, right? Now that obviously is a very big key trigger in the
Yes,
entire industry.
yes.
Now, if I had to talk about the city players, the regional players, which most of the companies are listed there. So how do you analyze these companies? Like, what do you look at? Because you're saying that most of the oil comes there, they add their premium. So how do you differentiate? If it is regional, is it capped at a particular amount, or is it on consumption versus? So how does that work out? Like, how do you do the math there?
So I think so. There are the government is looking at two different things. The first is the which was the first program which was run when in the first government that Mr. Modi was running, which was move from firewood to any form of gas or even LPG for that matter.
Ujjwala scheme.
The Ujjwala
That
scheme.
is,
And then that also reduced the pollution to an extent because even LPG is a way more efficient as compared to burning firewood, and it was also seen as a health hazard for the women. So they had a different dual purpose for that. The second stage was basically trying to ensure that everywhere people move on to gas. That is the natural gas from even things like LPG, for example in Mumbai. So the way in which we look at it is what circle, basically what area have you got? Within that, what's the mix? Because what happens is that, as I was saying, there are 3 different usages for that. And what is happening is that within that area, what is the prospect of new cars being sold, which will then slowly move to CNG for for understanding how the transport would grow. So more urban it is, usually it's better. Because as of right now, there is the product for running transportation on gas is there only in the 4-wheeler, as of right now. Then there is the number of urban households who are actually going to shift. And the third is that what is the density in each circle for industries, and how many of them are using it, and what is the current fuel that they are using, and hence what is the scope for that growth to happen. So it's a mix. Various places like, if you look at Indraprastha Gas or Mahanagar Gas being Mumbai and Delhi, transportation and pipe natural gas inside the house is actually a dominant part. But if you look at Gujarat Gas, for example, their circles are more dominant on the industrial zones. So the use there is, so that would be the starting point to understand what is the user mix.
So as Unmesh was saying, first you look at the 3 segments because the 3 segments have different margin profiles normally, as well as scalability. Households is much longer in terms of, it's going to continue, it's annuity income forever kind of, but it takes much longer to connect each household. Compared to that, you look at CNG, you start putting up retail outlets, you don't have to really go into each household or each location, and the customer comes to you. So the scalability or ramp up is much faster in CNG compared to a household. And individual consumption per consumer is also much higher in case of CNG. Industrial, you can, consumption per customer is higher, but margins are lower because there it's just a commodity. You are competing against, and in each of these segments, the competing fuel is different. So in case of households, you are competing against essentially LPG, the cylinders. In case of vehicles, you are competing with petrol and diesel, EV to some extent. It is assumed that EV is a competitor, but we'll come to that in the next point. And where industries is concerned, it's either in some cases liquid fuel like fuel oil or even coal, which is a lot more polluting. And this is a concern that we have seen pan-India slowly, it's coming up in industrial areas. And this is also one of the reasons for why the government wants to ensure gas penetration across the country. You do see a lot of pollution, especially where Gujarat Gas was there in Morbi area. or you have areas in Punjab, Fatehgarh Sahib, where there are steel mills. So there is significant pollution, and to get it down, you have to move from coal to gas or LPG. These are the, I mean, much better versions of. So depending on the alternate fuel, margins differ. In terms of margins, if you CNG would be CNG and household will be at the top, then followed by industrial. So you tend to see in terms of percentage, in terms of potential, how does it pan out for that particular area for that player. So that's one way, and the potential for growth, as Unmesh was mentioning.
So, but from what you're saying, industrial and vehicles, they have the alternate option. Whereas if you look at household, they don't have
LPG.
an
LPG
but that's going
cylinders.
away, right?
Wherever the connections are coming in,
Yeah.
there they are going away, because this is more convenient, more safer.
But in from what we have seen with tier 1 cities, nowadays even the new buildings, even
They
standalone
come
buildings are
with-
coming
exactly,
with the
yes.
thing.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
is that like a significant growth trigger? As you said, it's annuity.
It is.
Once the connection is put, I'm not going to remove it.
Yes, but the consumption per household is very small.
Okay.
It's a
In
lot-
the grand scheme of things.
Yes, in the
Yeah,
grand. So
yeah.
even for IGL or MGL, Mahanagar Gas or Indraprastha Gas, the household part would be about 10 to 15%.
And what
each.
would be the biggest revenue segment?
CNG, which is the vehicles.
The vehicles.
Okay.
Because you can convert faster, and for each car the consumption is much higher than and especially if you have commercial vehicles or light commercial vehicles or taxis, the consumption is significantly higher.
Okay. So now I want to segue into this because now you've told me the biggest revenue driver is the CNG part.
For these two companies,
For
yes.
these two companies.
Yes.
Now, if I want to understand about now the future, right? When we go into electric vehicles, and you said that it might not be a competition, but I would love to understand this because as we go further into the future, right now even auto rickshaws have become e-auto rickshaws. We have
Yes.
e-vehicles. Now we'll soon have e-trucks. Maybe, I don't know, in the future. How does that look like from a 10-year, 15-year horizon?
Okay, one thing, first basic thing to understand is EV and CNG both are taking market share from diesel and petrol.
Yeah.
The key big market is petrol and diesel. It's not CNG. CNG is wherever there are CNG alternatives in terms of the CNG retailing outlets. There, because of economics, a lot of users are moving to CNG. But both of these fuels are taking market share from diesel or petrol, depending on which vehicle segment you are talking about.
And
So
what
for
is
example,
the biggest? Yeah.
So, for example, in two-wheelers, it was assumed that CNG will not make headway at all. It was a EV territory and completely given up by even the city gas companies. But now we have Bajaj launching the CNG bike, and we understand even TVS is looking to launch CNG scooter. Not that this will make a dramatic impact immediately, but this suddenly opens up a market which was earlier considered to be completely EV territory for CNG. So whatever incremental demand comes from there, that's like a bonus. I mean, you didn't really count for it. Nowadays, people do count bonus as part of their compensation, but in this case, not.
Wow.
But no, essentially, this is something which was completely given up, and it opens a new area of growth for these companies.
So it's evolving right now.
It's evolving.
No, the other is that the EV life cycle, the EV industry life cycle is also in very, very early stage right now. The infrastructure is not there. The other is that at this point in time, what happens is that heavy vehicles, especially when you're moving goods, as of right now, there is no compelling EV proposition.
Correct.
So trucks, especially
Especially trucks, yeah.
heavier vehicles, essentially trucks. I mean, the 10-tonners and upwards. There, it's EV is finding it difficult to make its mark. It's essentially the cars or those segments where there is a slight penetration, but it's essentially three-wheelers, and two-wheelers is where EV has really made its mark. So over the long distance, in fact, it is the discussion is more about how we can use LNG rather than CNG directly for trucks, because then the carrying capacity is higher and it can go a longer distance. And Petronet, IGL, Gujarat Gas, Mahanagar Gas, all of them are involved in setting up and seeing. So longer term, because this has happened in China. China now LNG for heavy trucks has taken up almost 8% of the diesel demand. So that has been a big move in China. So essentially, it takes a lot of almost 200,000 barrels per day kind of diesel demand has moved away from diesel to LNG.
And
It's
if you
estimated.
talk about India, what
So,
would be the
so that's what we are looking at. Can India follow China? Can India go there? So essentially, now that becomes a proven test case that this works. LNG works for heavy vehicles, where other fuels, it's the range becomes an issue, whether it's EV or CNG. So that's where, and that also the retailing of that will come to the city gas companies by virtue of having retailing outlets already there. So
Yeah.
you
Why
have,
would you replicate that
huh.
Infrastructure elsewhere when you could
And
just
they,
give it
they
to
have
them?
an advantage. I mean, in terms of, so that again, just like CNG in two-wheelers, this is another area which is opening up in terms of potential growth when you're looking at 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, and this is a big market. So that, if that turns out, and it's economical. So it's clearly economical compared to diesel.
So, from a value migration perspective, we are basically moving away from petrol, diesel due to the rising cost, which is making it unsustainable for, say, even industries mainly. And before we go into the final goal of EV or whatever is ahead of EV, we have to stop between CNG and LNG, go there first. Then the value migration might go once technology catches up with EV. It's mainly for these industries.
Yeah. So one question that a lot of people ask is that is gas transition fuel, and hence there is zero terminal value, right? This is the type of question that we get.
Correct.
Now, honestly, given the use cases that are there for EVs and for gas as a replacement for diesel and petrol, at least till, and then the infrastructure to back all of that up. If you look at it over the long term, because one more thing is that for the EV as well, how are you going to produce the electricity, right?
Yes. Is it coal-based?
Is it gold based? Then it's not really better, right? So what is the holy grail? The holy grail is that everything should be electric vehicle or zero somehow, but that has to be then the charging has to be done by a source which is actually completely renewable.
Renewable.
Like natural,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah, so sun or
that's not
or
close by, yeah.
or it could be
And with storage.
and with storage.
That's why the BESS and all that
Yeah,
coming
so
in.
is this something that you can see in a country of 1.4 billion people? It's probably the transition is like a 50, 75 year.
Yeah.
And it has to be applicable in every use case. So if you look at fertilizer, eventually what will end up happening is that geopolitically, economically and environment wise, you will see the entire energy basket move out of coal and out of liquid oil, and it will then gravitate towards EVs, but a very large part of that basket and probably the dominant part of that basket is going to be gas.
Okay, now I
At
understood.
least in our lifetimes, I don't think
Very
that
No,
it's
and
going to
this
change.
has been an issue even for developed countries. Even if you
Yeah.
look at Europe, after the Ukraine crisis, they've actually moved back to coal
Yeah.
in some instances. And even for US, it's not been a clear runway for EVs or green energy. So it's, and we are talking about India as if it is static.
Yeah.
We are going to grow.
Yes.
So the growth part, I mean, can EVs keep pace with replacing the existing demand plus the growth? I think all energy sorts will remain. So within that, you need to move to energy forms which are more environment friendly. So in which case, then in terms of hierarchy, then after the EVs, you will have CNG and then the liquid fuels.
Yeah. So also what's happened
then
is that
coal.
in the near term, as with any other energy basket, even when oil took over, right, there will always be a transition period where you will also have disappointments, or where people underestimate the scale of the problem. For example, he touched upon this on EVs. While incremental market share in China for EVs as a percentage of everything is 50%, that to a large extent also has to do with their own economic policy, because they want domestic manufacturing to happen. If you look at what's happened in the US, interestingly, right now there are unprecedented discounts to buy EVs. Now, if it is such a big story, why is it not happening? Why are discounts there? Is because what's happened is the first cycle of EVs getting scrapped has only just started, and what people found was that in case of EVs, the scrap value is very low. People are not buying second-hand EVs basically because they're not really sure as to what has been done to that.
Well, most of it is battery cost.
So when you put it into context, what we are effectively finding is that right now there is a lull. There has been a sideways movement in that, and at the same point in time, gas is going up. So all of this will continue to happen, but in the foreseeable future, it doesn't look like. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying, in the foreseeable future, gas will only rise in importance.
So if you talk about the two companies that HDFC has started the initiating coverage, right? What are the 2-3 key reasons that you guys took these two companies? Like, what were the triggers that you spoke about the macro triggers and even the micro triggers, but now from a company standpoint, what are they doing that is unique or interesting?
Okay. One, just to step back a bit, one important point which will help the gas sector, apart from the focus of the government, is there is a big supply of LNG coming up from 2025 to 2030.
Yeah.
How?
So there is liquefaction capacity coming up in US, Qatar, these are the main suppliers, and some in Australia. Right now, 2024, the total global liquefaction capacity is roughly about 430 million tons. And the new capacity that is coming up is almost as much as 190 to 200 million tons. So it's going up by 40-45% over a 5-year period. This is huge in any commodity. If you look at, usually there is incremental growth. So it has got bunched up, but it is coming up in this 4-5 years time period.
With demand sustained.
So that's the other side of the equation. So you have now supply which is coming up over a 4-5 year period. Demand always in such cases is slow. It's not a step jump. So what happens is, in the meanwhile, prices will come off.
Yeah.
India is a consumer, very price sensitive. When prices come down, demand will go up much faster than what we have seen over the last 5 to 7 years. So that's what will play out wherever. So the cost of CNG will come off, the cost of gas for industries will come off, the cost for your household piped gas will come off. And where industries and CNG is concerned, you will see a much sharper growth because price coming off. So that is the second driver why we are positive on this sector going ahead.
So the revenue growth will definitely be there. Margin might be slightly affected because of the fall in prices, or that will cover up?
For a distributor, it doesn't matter. It's a pass-through. What matters is, so when prices fall, so they will add their margin on it, and the demand is high because the overall prices are lower.
So double trigger.
Yeah, it's a double.
So they will maintain the margins, and demand will be stronger.
Wow.
So you'll get the volume kicker, and the margins will stay intact.
So now coming to your question about IGL and MGL. So for both these companies, almost 70% of their volumes go to the vehicle, CNG, which is a high margin business. Now, there are slightly different or nuances to the growth for these two companies. Mahanagar Gas is where earlier their growth rate was very slow. Now they have added 3 new areas through an acquisition. So that will slowly start adding to the growth. Plus, in their own area, they have accelerated the setting up of retail outlets. So that we have seen has slowly started playing out in higher conversions or registrations of new CNG vehicles. So we expect the growth to be much faster for Mahanagar Gas. In case of Indraprastha Gas, the difference is the DTC is moving away from CNG and trying to move to EVs.
That's the bus.
That's the bus segment. Yeah. So there, over the next 1.5 years, it will take for that to play out. After that, it will move towards, so till that time, the growth rate will be slower. Because in the rest of the segments, the growth is strong. But this being a strong segment, almost, if I remember correctly, that's about 5% of their volumes. So that will not grow. That will actually decline. So for Indraprastha Gas, the growth is slightly back-ended. Mahanagar Gas, we believe the growth has already started last 1 or 2 quarters, and this will continue.
And this is a long-term play because what
this is
you're
a really
talking
long
about
term.
is like
both will be a longer term play.
Wow.
And both have strong balance sheet because they've been running the franchises for a long period, have net cash. So any opportunities which come up for acquisitions, like what Mahanagar Gas did, both would be open to do that. So that gives you some runway for growth going ahead.
And their capex is all built in, like most of their capex for
Yes.
the future growth.
Yeah, but the new areas they will continue to do the capex. So capex also has increased, but they are their operating cash flows are much higher than the capex that they have.
And how do you judge these companies? Is it standard P ratio judging, or is it
Market
something-
looks at it more from a P, though you can look at DCF too, simply because these are models which run more annuity-like. In fact, if you look at for Chinese companies, there what you mentioned, the household was a much bigger portion, and essentially your security deposits used to. There was a time when that used to drive the growth or the attractiveness of that company, and they did well. It's not as if we are a long way from there. We have a lot more growth before that, a lot more work to be done. So we believe next 10-15 years there is no issue about growth. They need to, the commodity cycles are beyond your control. You have to just put your head down and roll out the infrastructure. The demand will come.
So the
The
key
demand
risk is
there.
execution.
Yes.
If you put it in a perfect way.
Yeah, if there is any delay in delivery, it will only be because of execution. There is no other reason.
Wow, wonderful. Awesome. Yeah, I think this was an eye opener because, to be honest, before this podcast, I had zero knowledge in this oil and natural gas and the whole play out. But I think now I get a much better understanding about the last mile delivery that's playing out really well with the city gas players, right? So again, thank you, Unmesh, and thank you for coming on this show and helping me understand, and obviously you guys as well. So thank you, Harshad, for coming on this as well. And I hope you guys had a good time. I hope you guys enjoyed and understood a very complicated new sector. And if you have any doubts, any questions, put in the comment section below. Yeah, this is me, Shashank, signing out. Take care. See you guys. Bye. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to click on the like button and share this with your friends who would benefit from this amazing podcast series. Also, don't forget to click on the red subscribe button so that you can stay updated with more episodes coming up on the Make Money Matter podcast. You can also follow the show on Spotify, where we will update the latest episodes there as well. Now, one of the most important things about all these episodes is that we had experts from HDFC Securities giving you deep, valuable insight and knowledge. And all of this knowledge can be found in HDFC Securities reports as well, which is there in the description below. Now, these research reports are completely free and they offer you in-depth knowledge about the entire sector, which will also make you extremely financially smart. So follow us to get deep knowledge about each and every sector with experts. And don't forget to check out the research reports, because you don't need to go to 100 different places to check out reports, because we have all the amazing reports right here as well. And finally, the most important thing is that you need to make money matter. So stay tuned for more episodes and drop a comment below on what you think the next topic should be.
Investment in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.